What is so special about the people in the United States? Nothing is special. They are people just like you and me. I don't want to hear an American president ever again lecture me about human rights. Why?
100%.
Yeah, because they have been sending 2,000-pound bombs to the Israelis to bomb Palestinian children. From now till the end of time, the Germans need to stop talking about human rights. My family did not participate in doing a Holocaust against anybody. There's an attempt at moral superiority. Yeah. So, for instance, they will lecture us about human rights in Iran, or they lecture us about how Hamas has a bad attitude to women and this and that. Bad attitude to women. Women are dying under American bombs. Okay, you want to criticize the Iranians because they are saying, oh, you should cover your hair. Women are dying under US bombs. I don't want you to tell me about how much hair should be shown or not shown. Okay, you are obliterating people's heads and then lecturing us about the hijab or about whatever. This is the moral decline. The moral decline is they still think they are superior when in fact they are participating in genocides. Again, I want to underline this. This is not an Israeli genocide. This is an Israeli, U.S., European genocide. I think it's very wrong to consider. We should, poor Benjamin Netanyahu shouldn't bear the whole blame for this. Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, before him Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden, after him Donald Trump, all of them should be sitting in a prison cell in the International Criminal Court.
Hello and welcome back to Palestine Deep Dive. Today I'm very happy to be joined with very special guest, of course, because we always have very special guests. He is Vijay Prashad. I hope I said it correctly.
Absolutely.
Prashad.
Absolutely.
So Vijay is an Indian historian and journalist. He's the author of 40 books. Wow. How many years did it take you to write 40 books?
Let's not get into that because they're not all very big books. So some of them are quite little. For good reason, because I believe people should read. And if you make very fat books, they don't read.
Okay, because recently in We Are Not Numbers, we released our first book ever. And it felt like it took me so long to release the first book, although I didn't write it. So when I hear that someone has written 40 books, it blows my mind. Well done. Good job. So Vijay is also an author of 40 books, as I said, including Washington Bullets, Red Star All Over the Third World, The Darker Nations, A People's History of the Third World, The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South, and many other books. So let's start, Vijay, with your experience during the past year. How did you feel watching this live stream genocide over the past year and a half? And has the level of barbarity and violence surprised you?
Yes, the level of barbarity and violence has certainly been shocking. I can't say it surprised me, but it's been shocking. It didn't surprise me because, I've been as a correspondent in Iraq, in Syria, but really Iraq was a test case of this. People forget that when the United States bombed Iraq from 2003 onward, it was vicious bombing. They bombed the entire infrastructure of Iraq. They bombed water purification plants, electricity plants. They bombed the airport. They bombed some hospitals. They killed journalists, including Tariq Yaqub of Al Jazeera while he was on air. The violence that the United States inflicted on the Iraqis was extreme. Now, there wasn't access to the images because you didn't have the ubiquity of cell phones and so on. And also the US media was able to quite sufficiently suffocate images coming out of Iraq. So it's not like I was, not expecting something like this. In 2014, the Israelis, as part of their punctual bombardment of Gaza, almost every few years, 2006, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I mean, every year in the summertime, the Israelis went on a rampage and bombed one or the other part of Gaza. When they bombed Gaza in all those years, it's not like they didn't hit the hospitals or didn't hit the universities or didn't bomb UN institutions. They were doing it right through those years. It's just that in 2023, they almost decided to carpet bomb all of Gaza. In other words, to hit the hospitals, hit the universities, but not hit one hospital, not hit one university, but flatten all of them. And they used 2,500-pound bombs to flatten entire neighborhoods. 2014, they flattened neighborhoods in Jabalia, they flattened neighborhoods in the center of Gaza City. This time, they went after almost all neighborhoods. So it's the scale, not the actual quality of bombing. They've done this before. They've attacked, UNICEF buildings and so on. 2014, they bombed the UNICEF building in Gaza. Not unusual. The quality of the bombing was the same, bomb civilian infrastructure, but it was the sheer quantity. They bombed everything. That shocked me. So it wasn't a surprise. It was a shock that the Israelis decided effectively to just bomb from one end of Gaza to chase the people south, continue to bomb them. There was a lot of expectation that by the time the Palestinian who were fleeing from Gaza City got to Khan Yunis, it would stop. But then they went up to and started bombing Khan Yunis. Then as people went towards Rafah, there was again an expectation. You remember, it's going to stop. I mean, the fact that the Israelis ignored everybody. They ignored all the governments of the world. They ignored, except the United States, because I don't believe the United States and Israel are two countries. I think they are one country. But everybody else was saying, stop, pause, take care. Nothing. Not one day did they stop without wanting to wrest some concessions from somebody or the other. And there was no space for dialogue or negotiation. That was shocking.
And not only that, but the Israeli soldiers, while they were killing and destroying universities and hospitals and schools, they filmed themselves doing that and they bragged about it.
So ugly. It's in my opinion, there's a concept that I very much hope people will start to use. And this is the concept of the international division of humanity. For hundreds of years, in a period of, in a sort of context of colonialism, there was an understanding that some humans are better than other humans. Let's say Europeans or people who were considered to be white are superior to everybody else. Humanity was divided, and the people who were not considered to be white could be just killed. The first aerial bombardment takes place against Libya in 1911. The Italians just carpet bomb the Libyans and then bragged about it, saying that our aerial bombardment is a good education for the tribes, the Arab tribes in Libya. They learn to behave themselves. 1924, the British bombed the Kurds in northern Iraq. Again, Arthur Bomber Harris writes a report saying, these Kurdish tribesmen, they will learn to fear us. They're a lower form of humanity. When I watched the bombing by the Israelis of the Palestinians, it was very clear that there was an international division of humanity operating. One Israeli child, seemingly, according to some calculation in Washington, D.C. or in Tel Aviv, one Israeli child is worth 10,000 Palestinian children. If one Israeli child is hurt, you are allowed to kill 10,000 Palestinians. That's the attitude of the international division of humanity. And the way the soldiers were displaying children's clothes, breaking toys, and the cruelty, that cruelty, you can't even say it's excessive, because if an international division of humanity is operating, it's normal to treat the children of the savage with absolute contempt. And that's exactly how the Israeli soldiers were behaving. They treated Palestinians as savages. And this itself has to be considered not just a war crime, but this is beyond that. I mean, it's somehow even the term genocide seems too little. This is something beyond that. This is a crime against civilization.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's only Israel who treated the Palestinians as savages, but also most of the West, because they have enabled and participated in this genocide. And that actually takes us to another um, aspect of the conversation today, which is a report that your group authored recently. It's called Hyper-Imperialism. So we'd like to talk a little bit about hyper-imperialism. But before we go there, can you, in your own words and briefly describe to us or define to us what is imperialism, what is the global south, and what is the global north?
Yeah, this is an old concept, imperialism. Effectively, what imperialism refers to is a structure in the world where certain people, either a minority group of people as nations or a group of nations, oppresses the majority of the world, treats them as subhuman, takes their resources and sells them finished goods. In other words, continues to benefit by the subjugation of other people using their labor, their resources, and so on. That's imperialism. Imperialism is something that we experienced, during the British colonization of large parts of Africa, Asia, French colonization of large parts of Africa, some parts of Asia, so on. I mean, in a sense, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the totality of Palestine was colonized by the British and was held as a so-called mandate. Palestine was in British hands and north of Palestine in French hands, the French mandate, including what is today Lebanon. Then the extraction of resources and the use of other people's labor at lowered cost. That's imperialism. You see, we live in a slightly different period than the classical imperialism. Why is that? Well, some countries, particularly in the post-World War II period, centered around the United States, began to mute their various differences. So the Europeans muted whatever differences they had with the United States, and they created a bloc. That bloc has a military alliance. The military alliance is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, created in 1949. That bloc has a very important intelligence alliance called the Five Eyes Network, which includes Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. That was created in the 1950s. Now it's an 11 Eyes movement, includes some European countries. In 1974, these countries created a political economic group, which was the G7. It was, Italy, West Germany at the time, United Kingdom, France, Canada, United States, and Japan. These were the G7 countries. So if you take the military alliance, the intelligence alliance, the kind of political guidance coming from the G7, this group becomes the global north. And this group actually unifies policy and starts to act together. Now, we calculated military spending by this bloc. The NATO plus bloc, that means the NATO countries plus a few allies like Japan and South Korea, if you include their total military spending, it's 74.3% of global military spending. People think, oh my God, China is becoming a major threat to the world. China's military spending is 10% of the global total. Russia, 4%. It's this NATO plus country with the United States as the major spender on military arsenal. This is the real threat to the world. And Israel is a part of this bloc. I mean, I'm very much of the view that the debate that has happened over many years, is the United States directing Israel or is Israel directing the United States? This is a debate we should stop having. The fact is, the United States and Israel are one country when it comes to the Palestinians. They operate hand in glove. If you start thinking that they are not hand in glove, you will get confused. When Joe Biden would say, well, we're trying to tell them to have a ceasefire, but meanwhile he's shipping 2,000-pound bombs, what he's saying is merely to confuse the world. In fact, They weren't trying to get Israel to have a ceasefire. There's no evidence of that. Blinken will travel to Tel Aviv 10 times during the conflict. But okay, when the Ansar Allah government in Yemen said that, look, we cannot any longer tolerate weapons going through the Red Sea and going to help Israel kill more Palestinians, we're going to stop that. United States government didn't bother with any diplomacy. They didn't send Blinken to Sana'a to go and talk to the Ansar Allah leadership. There was no diplomatic overture. They just threatened the Yemenis and then they bombed them. So look, in that sense, the United States was bombing Yemen on behalf of Israel.
Yeah.
Where is the space between these countries? So we generally think of this global north as a pact, as a bloc. Germany, with the United States, supplied almost 100% of Israel's weapons. United States about 80%, Germany close to 20%. These are hand in glove. Britain provided a small percent, but still very sophisticated equipment to the Israelis. They are hand in glove. I don't imagine that it's useful to continue the debate and discussion whether there's any difference between Berlin, London, Washington, and Tel Aviv. I think they are part of a bloc which we call the global north, and they treat those who are on the other side of the international division of humanity without any care for their life, for decency. There's no care and concern at all.
That actually explains the situation very well. But my question to you, why is Israel so special to the West? And the West doesn't only support Israel militarily, but also diplomatically with media. It is very much part of the West, part of the North, of the global North. Why is that so? What is so special about Israel?
I would like us first to go to something a little absurd. Just the other day, an Israeli football team was playing a match in Amsterdam where their supporters arrived in the city and ran riot, tearing down Palestinian flags, chanting offensive, racist things, and then instigating a fight against the supporters of Ajax, the team that was there. What was an Israeli team doing playing in Amsterdam? Well, Israel plays in the European League. But by the way, for people who don't know this, Israel is in fact in Asia, is not in Europe. Secondly, Israel participates in Eurovision. Israel is part of Asia, it's not part of Europe. But the Europeans see Israel as a garrison, a European or a white garrison that is out there almost like an aircraft carrier in the Arab lands. They see Israel as part of them. And I'm saying this now with an understanding of the kind of racial or racist metaphysics that colonial ideology produces. Israel is Europe in Asia. There are so many quotations to this effect made by Israeli leaders saying that, we are a European civilization, we are a European bastion surrounded by Arabs. These are all racist formulations. To call Israel a European, part of European civilization is absolutely ridiculous. What does that mean? Is it or is it not part of Asia? If it's part of Asia, it's not part of Europe. But they don't mean this geographically. The reason Israel is part of Europe is the same way Australia is part of Europe. Australia also participates in Eurovision. This is a racist metaphysics. These are white countries. And I don't think this should be underemphasized. They support Israel because it's a white country fighting against people that they think of as dangerous barbarians. And I know I said this before about the international division of humanity, but I really feel like this gets underplayed and underspoken about in the analysis of the genocide against the Palestinians, that there is an enormous attitude of racialist white supremacy that operates here, and a kind of assumption in European and North American countries that somehow the whites of Israel have to be defended against the browns of the Palestinians. And that repulses me, that is what gives license to Israel to slaughter tens of thousands of people, including tens of thousands of children.
In your report titled Hyper-Imperialism, a Dangerous Decadent New Stage, there's a quote that I would like to read. You say, it is not a matter of exaggerations to say that the global north has declared a state of open hostility and war on any section of the global south that does not comply with the policies of the global north. What do you mean by this hostility and war on the global south? And where do you see Palestine fits into this?
So, to make the point, let's go to Cuba for a minute.
Yeah.
I just published a book with Noam Chomsky called On Cuba.
Yeah.
In the book, we make the point that the reason the United States is obsessed with this small island with only 11 million people, less than the people in New York City, the reason the United States is so obsessed is that the Cuban Revolution has been defiant. That's a word that the US State Department uses. It's Castro's defiance that they don't like. That's how they say it. And they are worried that that defiance will become contagious. So, therefore, that defiance has to be destroyed. And the way to destroy it is to do a blockade against Cuba for now almost 70 years. Palestine is actually right in this storyline. It's very interesting because you could make the argument that when the Palestinian leadership, which had been quite isolated in North Africa, having been removed from Beirut after the Israelis invaded Lebanon in 1982, the PLO had to leave, go to North Africa, were very detached from the Palestinian, occupied Palestinian territory. When the first Intifada happens in 87, the PLO was really not able to understand what was going on. Their links were not as tight and so on. At the time, they go towards the agreement, which we then know as the Oslo Agreements, 1994. Well, you would have thought that after 1994, after what Edward Said called the Versailles of the Palestinians, a kind of surrender, that the Israelis and the global north would have said, well, there's no more defiance. The defiance has ended. And in fact, it is to some extent true that there was a little truce, that the PA was allowed to establish itself, particularly in the West Bank, not really in East Jerusalem, which the Israelis were convinced they would annex at some point. They had land on it, built universities and so on. And Gaza was also a kind of expectation that maybe they could settle things there. Remember, they had settlements and so on in Gaza. What happens subsequent to that is that there were enough factions of the Palestinian resistance movement that did not accept Oslo. Some of these were of the left, but there were also groups like Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and so on that rejected Oslo. And it's their defiance that makes this idea of Hamas so central to the imagination of the West. Subsequent to the Hamas winning the Legislative Assembly elections 2005, that's when the bombing start of Gaza. It's to actually snuff out defiance by Hamas. They defied not only Oslo, but they defied the global north. Now, this doesn't mean that it's about Hamas. It's about defiance. And it's so interesting that the West linked Hamas to Iran very early on. Regardless of the West's stereotypical attitude to the Middle East, where they say, well, Shias and Sunnis don't get along. I mean, Hamas had nothing to do with Shiism. It comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood tradition. It was largely getting financing from Qatar and Turkey. There was really not much Iranian influence at all on Hamas. But the United States put together all the elements of defiance in the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, all in one place. And all that defiance had to be killed off. Later, when Ansar Allah comes in, they say again it's an Iranian proxy. I mean, now Mr. Netanyahu is conducting what I think of is an act of gaslighting. He wants, and he's been trying desperately, to turn the genocide against the Palestinians into a war against Iran. He wants everybody to think that what the Israelis are doing is not murdering Palestinians, but protecting the West from a defiant Iran. That's his gaslighting. That was, I think, the reason why they go to Iran to kill a Hamas leader. They go and murder Syed Hassan Nasrallah, who was, in fact, one of the most beloved leaders in the Arab world for the fact that he had resisted against the Israeli occupation of Lebanon, a legal resistance, and had defeated the Israelis. In fact, twice. Once by forcing the Israelis to leave Lebanon in 2000, and secondly, by not being defeated by the Israeli war of 2006. The murder of Nasrallah, the killing of a number of Iranian generals to try to provoke Iran into a war. And Iran has been extraordinarily disciplined, knowing that entering into this conflict actually benefits Benjamin Netanyahu because the United States will come and clobber Iran. So, this idea of defiance that which is why they want to say, look, we have nothing against the Palestinians. We just want to erase Hamas. But in fact, here's the crazy thing. If you just want to take out Hamas, why are you bombing civilian buildings at night? Because then you're killing entire Palestinian families. If you just want to go after Hamas, stop the aerial bombardment. Send in your military. Fight house to house to get to the Hamas people.
Why do you think they kill Palestinian civilians, entire families?
Well,
What is the justification behind this logic?
That is, I think, something I've already mentioned, but I think it's worthwhile putting it together. I think they are focusing ideologically that they want to eradicate Hamas because this is the logic of getting rid of defiance. That's what Israel is telling the West, because the West cannot tolerate defiance. The attack on Cuba is similar to the attack on Hamas along those lines. Don't permit defiance because defiance can be contagious. That's what they're telling the West. But what, in fact, the Israelis are doing is pretty straightforward. They want to clear out Palestinians from Gaza. Look, I've said for a long time, for over 10 years, that Israel will never permit a one-state solution. A one-state solution goes right up against the Israeli idea of the Zionist state. They know that if in 10 years the Palestinian population increases above the Israeli Jewish population, that the idea that Israel is a Jewish state is going to not work. They'd have to accept a binational, plurinational, in fact, because there will be Armenians and a whole other bunch of peoples. It would be a plurinational state of if it's a one state. That is unacceptable to the Zionist hardcore leadership. A two-state solution is largely impossible because the settlements in the West Bank have eaten the territory. East Jerusalem is almost completely annexed, and they are now emptying Gaza. What the Israelis want, in fact, is a three-state solution. That's what they are going for. And the three-state solution is Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. They want to push the Palestinians out into these territories. That's their goal. And they are trying to do it in Gaza in a really systematic way, pushing everybody to Rafah and then, pushing them along, and let's see how long Sisi can hold out. And by the way, this is an interesting point. How long Sisi can hold out? It is a message to General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to go back and read the record of Egyptian history from 1948 to 1952. In 1948, during the Nakba, the Egyptians tried to do something to help, very moderate intervention to help the Palestinians. But then they just sat there. And, King Farouk had bought all this equipment from the British. They didn't use it in the war. They just sat on it. There were radical low-level officers in the Egyptian army who began to meet. And they were frustrated and angry that their Palestinian neighbors were not being protected. And it was this group that then overthrew King Farouk and came to power, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser's coup in 1952 is directly related to Egypt not doing anything to help the Palestinians. General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, now president, has just sat on his hands. He has not permitted anything. He's not even permitted. I mean, look, Egypt has bought the best of American aircraft. Why didn't they just fly their aircraft across Gaza and establish a no-fly zone? 3 or 4 hours a day, fly aircraft, saying we're not going to permit. They did nothing. What is happening in the mid-rank air force of the Egyptian, armed forces? Are people? Where is the next Nasser? I mean, I don't want to suggest anything, but I mean, for God's sake, the Palestinians pushed up against the Rafah border, nowhere to go, no safe zone, and Egypt didn't just send the tanks to smash the gates and go in and establish a safe zone. Why didn't the Egyptian military enter Rafah and say you can't bomb Rafah? They did nothing. And in the middle of all this, for all their brave talk in the Gulf Arab states, the Emirate of Qatar decides Hamas has to leave. I mean, is this really the time to buckle under US pressure? It's quite disgraceful, actually. I'm just saying it very directly. But it is quite disgraceful that given that the Israelis have demonstrated that they want to push the Palestinians into Egypt, into Lebanon, into Jordan, these countries are doing nothing to assist the Palestinians and even to prevent. You see, why is Sisi not opening the gates, even just temporarily? I'm not saying Palestinians want to flee the land
Well,
because
he's saying that because if he opened the gates, then the Palestinians will leave to Egypt, and that would be the end of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians.
but he's saying it as if he's protecting Gaza. But in fact, he doesn't want the Palestinians to come to Sinai, to occupy the Sinai Peninsula. That's not something that they want to see either.
No, of course not.
Yeah, so, whatever he's saying is not true. In fact, that's why I'm saying that the Egyptian army could have entered. Because if Egypt had entered that conflict, sent in the tanks up to, say, Khan Yunis, and said, we want to establish a safe zone, it could have been a point of negotiation with the Israelis. Even if Egypt and Jordan had threatened to tear up the two peace agreements, I'm not saying even tear it up. Egypt's peace agreement goes to 78, Jordan's to 94. Just threatened to tear them up. And then let's see the reaction from Tel Aviv. They didn't even put that on the table. So, in my opinion, you said, why are the Israelis bombing civilian targets, killing people? Because they want to remove all the Palestinians. They want to claim the whole territory. This has now become a completely open agenda by the Israelis.
I think it's very open. It's very clear since the beginning of the war, since they started compelling people to leave from the north to the south and so on. So it was clear that they want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. But to what extent do you think that this is actually possible, that they can manage to ethnically cleanse Gaza and just bomb the Palestinians to Sinai or in Egypt?
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't want to answer that question because that question makes me very upset and sad. Because what does it imply? You know Gaza, of course, better than me, but those of my friends who are in Gaza don't want to leave.
Of course
Because they say if we leave, it's Nakba number 100. Okay, during this terrible genocide, the great Lebanese novelist Ilyas Khouri died. Ilyas Khouri, who wrote a great novel about Palestine, also used to say there was never a Nakba. There was no Nakba of 1948. There is a permanent Nakba. That concept of the permanent Nakba stays with me. Yeah. So people say we don't want to leave because the permanent Nakba means we can never come back. And so if we accept that, and if people are not going to leave, if tomorrow the Egyptians by some strange thing open the gate and people say we still won't leave, will the Israelis kill them all? Right now the world is not stopping the bombing. So then the answer to your question is, well, they'll just kill everybody. They'll kill everybody. I mean, the other day I was explaining to some people, if you've never been to a war zone, there are two elements of war that are often neglected, in terms of explaining to people. One is the noise. It's earth-shattering, the sound of war. Children are terrorized for their whole life. Their whole life, they suffer from PTSD, because the noise, which happens at night. See, it was acceptable or understandable that in an earlier era, If I had the means to shoot down a plane, then you bomb at night. It's understandable. But now nobody can fire at an Israeli plane. They still bomb at night. And they bomb people sleeping in their homes. That's why so many children are dying. Yeah? They're still bombing. This is terrifying because you don't know, when a bomb falls, there's that sound and then the explosion right next to you. Over there, you don't know if you are next. It's terrorizing. Second thing is the dust. It's hard to explain to people. All modern buildings are made with epoxy, with plastic, with all kinds of chemicals and so on. When you bomb a building, the dust is everywhere. And even survivors are breathing it. So now you have 2.3 million Palestinians. Yeah. You've got maybe 60, 70,000. The numbers are so unclear. Let's say 100,000 dead. Of the remaining 2.2 million Palestinians, everybody has breathed in these toxic fumes. Everybody's going to die before their time. Okay. So the genocide has been complete already.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already done. It's just that people are not going to die immediately, but they're going to die shorter than their lifespan. That is horrendous. So the ethnic cleansing, the forced displacement, all of these routine crimes against humanity, which amount to genocide, all of this is happening right now. So answer to your question, if people don't run, I think they're going to try to kill them, which is why stopping the Israelis now and stopping the Americans now is absolutely paramount.
What do you think is the core of this annihilation and violence wielded against these Palestinians today? Because we talked about political and economics and ethnic cleansing and genocide. What do you think the core of all of these of this annihilation? Is it dehumanization or something else?
I mean, it is this idea of the international division of humanity. It really is. It's the idea of eviction. Why should look? Let me go back hundreds of years. When the first English pioneers, so-called pioneers, landed in North America, they seized the land. John Locke was an English nobleman. He owned a lot of land in Virginia. While he was a landowner in Virginia with slaves and so on, Locke wrote one of the most important texts of liberalism, and that is the Two Treatises on Government. It's a text taught to children. The second treatise is a really important text, and the best part of it is often not given to people to read. In the second treatise, John Locke argues that God gave nature to humans to improve. And if humans don't improve nature, then they don't have a right to it. They can be removed from it. And those who want to improve nature should take it over.
Yeah.
This racist idea, which validated the expropriation of native land in the Americas, it's at the heart of liberalism, right? This idea that the people who are natives are not exploiting nature. So get rid of them, exploit nature. This idea lingers in a kind of civilization, Western civilization, that continues to see those who don't, quote unquote, improve nature should be removed. I mean, look, firstly, it's ridiculous because Gaza City is a highly developed city. It had universities, it had everything. It had malls, for goodness sake, with escalators and fountains and, all the things you'd imagine. So it was not like the Palestinians were, living in tents and so on. They had worked hard to develop and build a civilization. In fact, when I was in Gaza, I was so pleased to see the large number of art galleries.
Of course.
People loved painting and museums and, all of that. But they still managed to convey to people outside that Gaza is a refugee camp and the Palestinians, they are living like savages. And therefore, let's remove them all and build hotels, resorts, coastal property for the Israelis.
Not for the Palestinians.
No, not for because the Palestinians don't know how to do that. That's the
They
implication.
don't deserve to live.
They don't deserve to live because they can't live like people on that other side of the international division of humanity. And by the way, they are saying it directly. They are saying it. People who've been to the Mediterranean, they understand how beautiful the Mediterranean is.
Yeah, of course.
The Palestinians who live in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem grow up never having seen the sea
Yeah.
because they are not allowed through the pass restrictions. Most of them are not allowed to enter into 48 Israel and go to the beaches where Tel Aviv and so on is. They have never seen the sea. It's the Palestinians in Gaza who get an opportunity to go into the sea, and it is really compellingly beautiful. Children playing football on the beaches of Gaza. An Israeli plane flies over them, and 5 little boys are mowed to death while they play football. And then what do the Palestinian artists do? They go to the beach and they make a beautiful beach sculpture of the 5 boys playing football. That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then the vision comes, they don't deserve to use these beaches. These beaches must be owned by the big multinational hotel chains. They have to be owned by the extremely rich Israeli families. Palestinians don't deserve the beach because, as John Locke says, they haven't used the beach like God intended, which is private property, giant houses for the rich. Instead, the beaches of Gaza were open to everybody.
Wow. Okay, let me go back to this report you produced recently. Allow me to read this very long quote, and maybe we need to spend some time explaining it to us, please. So you said over the last 20 years, the global north has endured a significant relative economic decline along with political, social, and moral decline. Its false moral claims of civil rights and oppressive freedom are now complete mockeries as they seek to make illegal the public, including online, support for Palestinian rights. This full-on support for the humiliation and destruction of the darker people of the world is reminiscent of past centuries, exposing what can be described as collective white fragility. There is a lot that we need to entangle here. But can you explain to us what is the economic decline that the global north is facing right now or enduring?
Well, since 2006, the the capitalist countries of Europe and the United States have been in the middle of a major depression. I mean, they don't call it a depression because they have created a definition of a depression, which is 3 cycles of downward growth. This is not sufficient. I mean, these countries are unable to demonstrate a growth rate. The reason it's not a depression is if your growth rate is near zero, it's not going to go down any further. It's basically sitting around zero, 1%, 1.2%.
Yeah.
This is a nothing growth rate. These economies are significantly hemorrhaging. I mean, we are sitting in London and talking. In the United Kingdom, they decided let's build high-speed rail that will go from Edinburgh to Manchester, down from Manchester to London, then, from Edinburgh, I think, to Leeds and to London, a kind of diamond shape, and from London all the way to Paris and then to rail networks in Europe. They had to cancel it. I mean, in fact, at the Conservative conference, former Conservative leader Rishi Sunak had to go there and say, no more high-speed rail to Manchester. It's embarrassing. They can't even build a train. In Germany, the train system has gone for a 6, doesn't exist anymore. It's in really bad shape. United States, I mean, look, between Beijing and Shanghai, it used to take 34 hours to go by train.
Yeah.
Now it takes 4 hours. And the train is fantastic. From 34 hours to 4 hours. Okay, the train runs at 300 kilometers an hour. In the United States, the train runs at about 100 kilometers an hour. I mean, I'm using trains as an example, but we can talk about other things. You want to talk about phones, you want to talk about solar energy. In all these areas, the West is no longer the dominant player in producing modern technology. Their economies are in decline. I mean, you can see it walking around the streets. It seems like this is a civilization that's willing to tolerate having people without homes, living on the street. It's willing to tolerate childhood poverty increasing. United Kingdom, childhood poverty has gone up. United States, childhood poverty has gone up. These are situations of decline. Meanwhile, at the same time, China has eradicated absolute poverty. They have these high-speed rails. I mean, I'm just comparing the two to make a point. The quote you read ends with a phrase, white fragility. This is a very important concept for me. What does this refer to? I mean, there was a feeling that if the United States puts enough pressure on China, China might reverse some of its gains. They might deaccelerate. Recently, the University of Chicago professor John Mersheimer said in an interview that he thinks it's too late, that China will now no longer be able to be pushed back, and the United States uses that for gain. The only way the US can push China back is if the US uses its military power to bomb all of China. It's very unlikely that they're willing to risk a nuclear war. On the other hand, white fragility. There is a fragility involved here. They cannot tolerate the fact that they are just other people on the planet Earth. I mean, what is so special? What is so special about the people in the United States? Nothing is special. They are people just like you and me.
Number of homeless people.
Well, there's that. But I mean, they are just people like us. There is no international division of humanity. We are just people. So, I mean, the only way for the United States to come to terms with the fact that it's not going to be the leading economy, it's not going to be the main political power, and so on, is if the people realize that they are just like everybody else, nothing special. But because they're not able to realize that, there is this white fragility that blocks everything. And this is that idea that how can we become ordinary people? We are special. So that's why that term white fragility is there. It creates a kind of sensibility that, one mustn't make us ordinary. We are special. You're not special. You're not special. There's no difference between somebody in Germany and a Palestinian. Nothing different. You're both people. There's nothing superior about you. And I'm actually quite fed up listening to European and US politicians talk as if they are superior to the rest of us, lecture us about human rights and so on. I don't want to hear an American president ever again lecture me about human rights. Why?
100%.
Yeah, because they have been sending 2,000-pound bombs to the Israelis to bomb Palestinian children. From now till the end of time, the Germans need to stop talking about human rights. My family did not participate in doing a Holocaust against anybody. Okay? I have no roots in their civilization actually did a Holocaust first in Namibia. They killed the Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1906, a genocide. Then they killed Jews, Gypsies, communists, but mainly Jews, in the Holocaust in Germany and in Eastern Europe. That was the Germans.
And also, the white people killed each other in the World War I and World War II.
They slaughtered each other with mustard gas and whatever. I don't want them to lecture us on human rights, okay? We are developing, what's human rights? Nobody living on the street. That's human rights. If Keir Starmer, who's supposed to be a great human rights lawyer, wants to lecture about human rights, let him first eradicate the problem of people having no homes in London. In fact, in his own constituency in London, where I was today, and I saw people living on the street.
True. Tell us more about the moral decline that you also mentioned in this quote.
Yeah, I mean, it's related to this. There's a moral, there's an attempt at moral superiority. Yeah. So, for instance, they will lecture us about human rights in Iran, or they lecture us about how Hamas has a bad attitude to women and this and that. Bad attitude to women. Women are dying under American bombs. Okay, you want to criticize the Iranians because they are saying, oh, you should cover your hair. Women are dying under US bombs. I don't want you to tell me about how much hair should be shown or not shown. Okay, you are obliterating people's heads and then lecturing us about the hijab or about whatever. This is the moral decline. The moral decline is they still think they are superior when in fact they are participating in genocides. Again, I want to underline this. This is not an Israeli genocide. This is an Israeli, US, European genocide. I think it's very wrong to consider. We should,
Yeah.
poor Benjamin Netanyahu shouldn't bear the whole blame for this. Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, before him Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden, after him Donald Trump, all of them should be sitting in a prison cell in the International Criminal Court.
Is Gaza a warning to the future? And why should people in the West be concerned about what's happening in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza?
Well, a couple of things. One is, yes, Gaza is a warning in the same way as what is being done to the Cuban Revolution is a warning. If you defy the West, they will whack you. They are like a mafia. They don't tolerate any defiance. Anybody who defies will be hit. But it's also a warning to the West that, your plans of eradicating defiance are not going to win. You can kill as many people as you want. Okay, tomorrow they've destroyed Hamas, but just a reminder to people in the West, Hamas was created in the 1980s. This struggle for Palestinian liberation starts in the 1930s, with the revolt of 1936, 36 revolt, the Palestine revolt. It starts then. It's 12 years before the Nakba. The revolt has a long
Against the
history
British mandate.
against the British mandate, against the selling of land to colonials and so on. It's a very long history. There was no Hamas in 1936. There was no Hamas in 48. There was no Hamas in 67. There was no Hamas in 73. Hamas comes in the 1980s. So I think they might eradicate Hamas today, but they're not eradicating the Palestinian resistance. It will take its form. And for those who believe that if Hamas goes, everything ends, you're not watching what happened in China. The Chinese brought together 14 Palestinian factions to sit down for the first time in decades and build a common agenda and platform. It's not about Hamas anymore. It's about the Palestinian resistance. And that is not gone. That is intact and will reappear immediately.
Do you think that the left in the West has failed Gaza? Trade unions and workers' movements all around the world, do you think they have failed Gaza?
I don't think they've failed Gaza. I think that they're up against something difficult. Trade unions in India, the Dockers Union said we will not load ships with weapons to Israel. I think the Belgian unions, the union in Western Australia, lots of unions did things, South Africa and so on. I think the rolling demonstrations in the United States have played a major role in changing global consciousness. Every day in New York City, there's some demonstration in front of the New York Times. When I went to two of them in the United States, very large, sincere young people, very angry. In the halls of the U.S. Congress, there's always somebody from Code Pink or from one of the groups interrupting, saying this is a genocide, why are you supporting genocide? Similarly, in Europe, there's been constant, but in a sense, this left is too weak. It's not strong enough. I mean, to confront the US war machine will take something else. It will take a shift in the geopolitical balance of forces. I mean, 1 million people demonstrated in New York City to prevent the US from going into an illegal war against the Iraqi people in 2003. And George Bush just set it aside. I don't think, and I'm a little pessimistic about the ability of movements in the global north to change the balance of forces on their own. I think the rise of India, Indonesia, China, the appearance of countries on the African continent being very brave. I think the kind of the clarity of the Colombian government of Gustavo Petro and so on. I think this is changing the balance of forces. I don't think the left in the West, workers' movements and so on, can do it on their own. But this pressure from outside, the Mexican government now of Claudia Sheinbaum, before of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, this is changing the conversation. The fact that South Africa goes to the International Court of Justice and is backed by the Latin American governments, I think sends a really strong message to the global north that the world is no longer taking leadership from London or Paris or Washington or Brussels. People are not interested. They're looking elsewhere for leadership. In fact, they're looking to themselves. The coup d'etats in the Sahel region, that go from Mali out to Niger, These governments, fierce in their determination to have an independent foreign policy. I mean, India is an interesting case in point. India has not supported Israel in this war. India, right through this period, has called for the two-state solution, which
Mm,
effectively means no annexation of Gaza. That's an important gesture. Now, it's also true that they allowed workers to go to Israel, and it's complicated. But they didn't take a position which I thought they would take.
mm,
They stayed within the realm of the BRICS position,
mm,
which is supporting a two-state solution, calling for a ceasefire. The world is changing. The West is no longer going to be able to dictate its terms without using force. And that's why in that report that you read from, that's why we call it a decadent and
mm,
dangerous global north, because it is decadent because its leaders don't inspire, they don't have
mm,
any ideas, they are basically mediocre, useless people. And it's dangerous because they can't inspire, their only instrument is war. And that's what they go to. All they know is war,
mm.
and that cannot win them the respect of the world. In fact, it increases their decadence. So their decadence and their dangerousness goes together
Mm.
in a spiral downwards.
What does a liberated Palestine mean to the region? And will capitalism allow a free Palestine?
I don't know about the second point. Will capitalism allow a free Palestine? But I know for a fact that imperialism will not. It will not want to see a free Palestine. I mean, this is bringing us to a very complicated area because, in a sense, it's hard to imagine what is a free Palestine. There are so many people who promote the idea of the one state solution, a kind of L shaped country, which includes all of historical Palestine. The Golan, goes back to Syria. Perhaps Methuselah's finger goes back to Lebanon, and the rest remains a Palestine where all the people live in a kind of plurinational system. I don't know if that is going to be possible without a lot more struggle. I mean, in a sense, this is not a struggle of the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians would accept a one state solution. This is a struggle within Israeli society. Israeli society has decayed, it has distorted itself, it has become a military society. Zionism is no longer Zionism, it's gun Zionism. It's a militarized form of Zionism. It's a Zionism of settlers with guns who intimidate other people. It is a Zionism that has come to believe the biblical prophecy as real. All of that has to be undone culturally in Israel before you can think about a one state. So, short of that, yes, you can have enclaves called Free Palestine. But look, frankly, Gaza over here, the West Bank over there, maybe a part of East. This is not liberated
Mm,
Palestine. This is a joke. I mean, you're not even following Oslo and creating ability for people to go between the West Bank and Gaza. These are little tiny statelets. This is South Africa in the last days of apartheid, building the frontline states. This is not real. It's not a Palestinian problem. We're not at the threshold
mm,
of a Palestinian problem. This region, the Levant, faces an Israeli problem. Israel has a problem. It has a cultural problem. It has to deal with its own population. There is no problem in Palestine culturally. So I don't think Palestinians need to move very much, in terms of cultural
mm,
thinking about the future. Israel has to move miles. And I'm not sure it has the capacity right now to move. It doesn't have the intellectual leadership to move. It doesn't have the political leadership. It certainly doesn't have the moral leadership. Nobody seems to be willing to stand up there and confront the rot of gun Zionism. Everybody is with it. I mean, the difference between Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu is zero. I
mm,
mean, it's about tactics, not about gun Zionism. I cannot find a politician in Israel today who will stand up clearly against gun Zionism. They are all united in that. And that is the downfall of the Israeli moral project. There's no room for a moral project anymore. This is a military project. Israel is becoming a military garrison. And that's what it'll have to survive as. It's a garrison state. It has no moral claim to the world any longer. It's like it has become the battleship, of the West, right there. It's like a ship sitting off the coast of the Mediterranean, of the Mediterranean coastline. They don't have the capacity right now to transform themselves, and that really is the tragedy of Palestine.
That is a tragedy for Palestine, and that's a tragedy for the Israelis themselves.
Oh, I mean, for the Israelis, it's a greater tragedy because their capacity to be moral beings is in question. There is no such problem for which is why I said the Palestinians are ready to take the next step forward, but the Israelis are not. And that moral capacity, to meet the Palestinians and build a society together is just not there. They want to create Israel as a giant gated community. In fact, as I said earlier, a giant military camp, and that's not sustainable in the world. People will not permit that. Colombia, which used to supply 60% of Israel's coal, has this August stopped sending coal to Israel at all. There will be no more coal going from Gustavo Petro's Colombia to Israel. That means 60% of Israel's supply of coal is gone. Other countries are filling it in. For now, South Africa, strangely, seem to be filling in the gap. There's a lot of pressure from the trade unions, from COSATU and NUM, to prevent any South African coal going to Israel. When that gets cut off, the next supplier is Russia. Will Russia stop supplying coal to Israel? If you don't have a moral place in the world, people are just going to stop supplying you. Then it's up to the United States or maybe the Europe. The Europeans don't have access to energy. Where are they going to get coal from? Will it come from Australia? It will be enormously expensive. These are the kind of compelling ways in which gun Zionism will find itself isolated.
Lastly, do you think there is a light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinians?
Of course, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a light at the end of the tunnel for all human beings. All human beings have a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, look, we have to also remember that millions of Palestinians live outside the region. They are part of the Palestinian permanent exiled community. I live in Santiago in Chile. In Chile, there are 500,000 Palestinians. They have a football team, the Palestinians. There is always going to be a Palestinian flag flying somewhere in the world. The question you're asking is a different one. Is there a future for Palestine? And I think that's a complicated question. Palestinians will live forever because I don't think that families exiled permanently in the United States or in Britain, Palestinian families will not any longer tell their children, you are a Palestinian. We come from Nabi Saleh, we come from Bethlehem, we come from here, there, don't forget it. This kafia is a color that reflects our part of. These memories are going to remain. The traditions of food and culture will remain. Why? Because the people has got a moral claim on the world. So I don't think Palestinians don't have a future. Palestinians have a future. The idea of Palestine has a future. Does the territory of Palestine have a future? That is a very difficult thing to answer because that has, again, nothing to do with the Palestinians. It has everything to do with the moral collapse of Israel. If Israel can rejuvenate itself, then perhaps there will be a state with Israelis and Palestinians in that territory. I worry that in the short term, what will a gun Zionist government do to things like the Al-Aqsa Mosque? I mean, these are very dangerous times. Dangerous, provocative things can be done. There are dangerously provocative, far right-wing Israeli groups that could do acts of terror against just unbelievably important places that are within their territorial control. So I don't know where this goes, but I do hope, for the sake of all of us, that Israel finds a way to rejuvenate its society and some moral force appears and basically attacks and destroys gun Zionism and creates humanity, an Israeli humanity that is not committed to massacring entire peoples.
Vijay, thank you very, very, very much for joining us. That was very powerful and illuminating.
It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
As Israel attempts to erase the Palestinian people under the cover of darkness, targeting journalists and censoring the press, we must rise from the ashes. At Palestine Deep Dive, we are building a multimedia space where our voices, the Palestinian voices, are always front and center. And right now, we just need 3,000 more of you to join our regular supporters and back our work so we can rapidly expand our output. Help us build the future of journalism. Become a supporter at PalestineDeepDive.com/support. This is 100% independent media powered by you.